Was 2025 really the disaster year for pop music that we've talked about, or did it come through with some really interesting stuff towards the end? It is time to unpack the year in popular music, everything that happened from the charts to some of the niche favorites, the records that broke through, the records that didn't quite make it, and why it all happened. I'm going to talk about it all today. Everything from Morgan Wallen to Addison Rae and everything in between. Let's get into it. I am Sam, also known as Pop Sam Cam, and welcome to the Pop Pod. If you like this podcast, I would love it if you're not already subscribed to hit the subscribe button, and you can also rate us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever else you can do it. Hit 5 stars if you're enjoying this podcast. It really helps with our visibility, and you can also join the Discord where we're going to have much more conversation about the albums that defined 2025. Basically, how it's going to work over the next couple weeks is we're going to unpack 2025 as a year in music. Today, we're going to start with more of a broad roundup of what happened in popular music, everything that happened on the charts and what it signals about where we're going in 2026. I'm going to give you my favorite songs of the year, my favorite albums of the year, and then we will also look forward to 2026 with an episode in a couple weeks' time. Thank you for your patience with the podcast over the past couple weeks. I've been traveling, and we've also been dealing with working out this issue where we're not allowed to play music on Spotify podcasts. We're still trying to work that out, so if you can't hear music throughout the podcast, that is the reason why. Basically, I was in Australia for what is technically, I guess, the Australian version of the Grammy Awards. I went there for a couple weeks and really listened to a lot of Australian music, met a lot of Australian artists, and kind of reintegrated with what I used to call home. I also got to do interviews on the ARIA red carpet, which was really fun, and ended up with an interview with Tyra Banks, which was equal parts interesting and terrifying at the same time. So that is why the podcast has been a little bit up and down over the past few weeks, but we are back now. Jono will be back at some point this week, and we will probably unpack our favorite albums and songs of the year together. But for now, let's get into this episode about 2025. You might remember an episode from a couple months ago where I said that pop music was heading in a conservative direction based on what the charts were telling us. And I think that is a good place to start with this episode, because when we think about what has been doing really well on the charts this year, it's a very different position broadly to what we were dealing with last year. Last year we had huge releases by people like Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, Billie Eilish, Beyonce. And we also had the rise of artists like Sabrina Carpenter, Chappell Roan, Charlie XCX. We've said it over and over and over again. And it was signaling a really exciting time for pop music. And not just like pop music led by female artists, but really upbeat, jubilant pop music that addressed a lot of different things. It was a very diverse range of artists that were popping through. And I just felt really excited about where music was going to head. Fast forward to 2025, and things are starting to look very different. Obviously, the best-selling album at one point this year in the US was Morgan Wallen's I'm the Problem, which had incredible first-week sales and has remained in the top 10 for most of the year, and has also had some of the most popular songs of the year as well. He gave Tate McRae her first number one with their collaboration, which I can't recall its name and I'm not going to bother trying. But he was one of the major moments. And then we also had Benson Boone doing incredibly well. We had Alex Warren doing incredibly well as well. Teddy Swims with his song Lose Control, which really just wasn't leaving the charts. And you had this kind of like cross-section where I guess last year country music was coming to meet pop music, and we had obviously people like Beyonce who were dipping into it as well. And things just changed this year where it was less of that and it was more of going in a conservative country direction, but also this like conservative singer-songwriter direction. And I don't think that's like largely a bad thing, but to see that only represented on the charts at one point was somewhat worrying. Alex Warren's Ordinary, probably the biggest hit of the year, maybe. The Fate of Ophelia withstanding, but that song has this kind of like real, I don't know, like wedding feel to it that represented something far more traditional for the charts. And it's a long way away from something like Chappell Roan's Good Luck Babe doing incredibly well, or even a cheeky, like explicit pop song like Sabrina Carpenter doing well. And it kind of reflects this like period in media and in politics in general where a lot of the more conservative stuff is rising to the top. If you look at the most popular podcasts in the world, for example, a lot of them are conservative. And so it makes sense to me that music has started going in this direction. But that was the conversation that I was having earlier in the year. And I feel like over the past couple weeks in particular, a couple things have changed that have made me start to think that we may start flicking back the other way. And the first thing that makes me think that is that the rise of a certain artist. So after we got the Sydney Sweeney Good Genes ad, which I'm not going to go into any more than to say that, we got kind of what felt like an answer to that in the Katseye Gap ad. Katseye had been doing pretty well amongst obviously like K-pop fans and pop fans in general. And Gnarly for me felt like something really exciting. And then the Gap ad just completely blew it up and helped Katseye get to this point where they're now nominated for Best New Artist. And I feel like that's a really exciting moment because I think when things push really heavily one way, they start pushing the other way. And that is often when you get the best art. And I feel like that has kind of been happening quite a lot in the tail end of the year. I mean, maybe not quite a lot's the right word, but I feel like we're starting to get some more exciting things happening. Just recently, like we're seeing Tyler come through with Chanel as being a massive hit. I've really enjoyed Folded by Kehlani doing incredibly well on the charts, and that is despite the very aggressive political position that Kehlani has taken over the past couple years, particularly in respects to Palestine. And it's heartening to see an artist like that thrive commercially despite being quite a controversial figure politically. We've also had Ray come through with Where's My Husband, which is interestingly like sort of more of a conservative sound by an artist who is pushing boundaries. And that's an interesting juxtaposition to see in the charts. And it's also something that we've seen with the rise of Olivia Dean as well and the success of her album. I don't really think that her music fits into the box of Alex Warren's Ordinary because she represents something far more radical. But her music definitely does like lean a lot on Motown and more traditional styles as well. And I feel like that's maybe where pop music is sort of headed into, is going into these more sort of traditional styles and trying to blow the box open and explore within them and do different things. It's certainly what The Art of Loving by Olivia Dean does. And I think it's also something that Lux, Rosalia, has done very, very well, obviously just over the past couple of weeks. But La Perla, for example, doesn't shout pop hit from the get-go, but it's done incredibly well for her streaming-wise and has shown the capabilities of pop music. And La Perla, obviously, or the whole album in general, takes from quite traditional and sometimes conservative, like orchestral stylings and manages to bend it in a very Rosalia way and do some very interesting things with it as well. So that's been very heartening to see too. And I feel like you can also throw to the top of the year with Bad Bunny and his album, which took from sort of traditional Puerto Rican sounds and blew them open as well and tried something really different with them too. And I just think that's something that we're going to see more and more of as next year progresses. And maybe we're going to start moving away from the Alex Warren, Morgan Wallen kind of sound. I don't know. It still remains to be seen. But if you look at the Billboard Hot 100 this week and compare it to where we were a couple of months ago, it's certainly looking a lot more interesting. Obviously, we have Taylor Swift at the top, which is a different story and something that we'll touch on later on in the podcast. But then we have Hunter X, Golden from the K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack. And I think that that's been an exciting moment for pop music as well. It's shone a light on Audrey Nuna and Ray Ami, who are two artists who I've been very excited about for a while, but have kind of operated on the periphery of pop music, meeting this moment in mainstream pop, which is very cool to see. You've also got, obviously, Olivia Dean, who we've talked about. You've got Leon Thomas, who is an R&B artist, who really hasn't had to bend too much to get this major moment. He's been a songwriter behind the scenes and also been making music himself for quite a while, but Mutt has really taken off. Then we've got Folded Kehlani. We've also had the success of Ravyn Lenae as well, and that's a point that I want to touch on later on, which is the rise of R&B that we're starting to see in the charts too. Then we've got Justin Bieber Daisies. I don't think that's a really traditional pop record by any means. He obviously works with McGee and Dijon on this album and found this sort of R&B soul sound that was also mixed with a little bit of alternative rock. And it's been cool to see the success that song has been having as well. We also have SOMBR, who I think has been a very interesting artist to watch this year. I think SOMBR pulls a lot from alternative rock and also 60s rock. I think people like The Strokes and also the Beach Boys are two of the biggest influences in there. That's another trend that I've been really watching come through this year, which is this rise of alternative music going from something being more niche into something more mainstream. And I think this is a movement that we saw many years ago. If you throw back to acts like The Strokes and Yeah Yeah Yeahs, it feels like it's starting to happen once again. And SOMBR and the Marias and more recently Geese are testament to this as well. So looking at the Billboard Hot 100 right now, I'm feeling much more positive about the direction of music than I was a couple of months ago. I don't think that there's anything super blow the box open, weird or wild on here. But I think that there are enough artists on here that are doing interesting enough stuff for me to think that maybe the doom and gloom of earlier in the year is passing somewhat. Let's talk about Taylor Swift. Obviously, the biggest story of 2025, maybe just an absolute sales juggernaut, over 3 million in the first week for The Life of a Showgirl. What I want to talk about specifically is, does this latest Taylor Swift era say anything about pop music in 2025? And I think the answer is no. I think that Sabrina Carpenter's record Man's Best Friend is probably the easiest tie that we can make to The Life of a Showgirl, but I think that they were drawing on very different references. The Life of a Showgirl made with Max Martin, and then Man's Best Friend made with Jack Antonoff. And I feel like maybe Man's Best Friend could be a little bit inspired by earlier Taylor Swift work. But I'm looking at the charts now and I just can't see anything that feels like Taylor Swift coded at all, which is a very different position than we were in at the end of last year, where I think that Sabrina's sounded more Taylor coded. We obviously had Gracie Abrams as well. I feel like we could be moving out of this period of all the new female pop artists popping up sounding like Taylor Swift in some kind of way. And I think it's just because Taylor Swift right now is really existing in her own ecosystem where her fan base is so large that it almost doesn't have to permeate any more of the mainstream to be mainstream and to be ubiquitous, which is a very, very interesting position to be in. Do I think that things are going to start sounding like The Fate of Ophelia? I actually don't. And that's very different to how I felt about Folklore or even Midnights, because it felt like that wave of Taylor Swift was bringing on a whole new era of fans, and in turn, a whole new era of artists that wanted to sound like her. But what feels very telling about this era is that the people who love Taylor Swift have ridden for this album hard. The people who don't like Taylor Swift have just completely ignored it, and there seems to be no in between. And I think because of that, it's not going to have the mainstream influence sonically that maybe her other projects had. I could be wrong, but just looking at it, like The Fate of Ophelia, Opalite, feel like anomalies on the charts right now, and there's not really a lot that I think mimics the sound of them. I do think that Opalite is going to have a moment over Christmas. I think that it has that jubilant, exuberant kind of Christmas feel to it, and that could perk it back up the charts. But Taylor Swift is really one of the only sort of, I guess now what you could call legacy pop acts. Legacy's not totally fair because obviously she's still extremely relevant. But whereas last year she joined people like Billie, and crazy to call Billie legacy when she's still like in her early 20s. But in terms of like really established pop acts, we had Billie, Ariana, Beyonce, as I said, all coming through with records. This year wasn't like that at all. And in fact, Taylor Swift and Lady Gaga are probably two of the only really huge, The Weeknd as well, huge artists that came through. I think what really ties these artists together is that they've been making music that sounds uniquely them, and there haven't been that many copies of it either, and they've kind of existed in their own ecosystem. I definitely think that's true of Lady Gaga, who's had a phenomenal year, and that's a story that we'll talk about when it comes to ranking albums and songs. But I don't think Mayhem really signals what the sound of pop is going to be moving forward. And maybe that's something to be said for the year in general, is that trying to like put a label on what the sound of 2025 was is very, very hard, because the center of pop is just kind of dismantling more and more each year. And apart from obviously this like singer-songwriter conservative trend and an R&B trend that we'll talk about later as well, there really wasn't anything. And I think that we are witnessing kind of the algorithm and what it is doing, in that it's making people more and more like contained to their own musical tastes and less knowledgeable about what's going on in a mainstream sense and what even is the mainstream anymore. I think ubiquity is really difficult to come by now. And I think because of that, some of the songs that have been number one this year, even if they've been number one for weeks, may have totally missed your radar, because your algorithm instead is on the Marias, or it's on Clairo, or it's on Tyler the Creator, or something different. And you feel like they are sort of leading your year, whereas the others don't define your year at all. Whereas I think like if you go back even 10 years ago, everybody could be pretty decided on what a song of the summer is, or what a song that defined the year was. But I just don't think it is that way anymore, which leads me on to what I want to talk about, which is kind of the rise of the pop niche class. This is something that is not new at all, but I think it's something that's becoming more and more common, and it's becoming less common to be able to have that kind of like major chart moment. We saw it, I think, when we first start seeing it is with artists like Robyn, Charli XCX, Tove Lo, and Carly Rae Jepsen, where they're not doing super well on the charts, but they are getting these really cult fan bases who are riding hard for them and helping them to sell out large venues and give them notoriety, even though they weren't getting any chart hits. And that's something that has happened this year with a number of pop artists, and I'll just talk about a few of them. But the first one is Zara Larsson. Zara Larsson is somebody who's done exceptionally well throughout her career. She's had a number of really, really huge hits. Just last year's Symphony, which was already a hit for her, ended up taking off again because of a viral meme. And instead of chasing that sound, Zara takes the aesthetic of that and she like forms it in, or morphs it into this project, Midnight Sun. And Midnight Sun, in terms of commercial numbers, may actually go down as one of her least successful albums. But this is why that sort of success doesn't really matter anymore, because what it's done is it's really solidified this fan base that really, really cares about her now and really rides for her because she's made this strong artistic choice that they've been able to resonate with. And because of that, she's on what is probably her most successful headline tour ever right now. I think the virality of all her work is really important. And I think that may be the measure of pop success moving forward. And we're going to start looking less and less at the charts and more at what people can sell in terms of tickets and merch and things like that to really measure how they're doing. And that's something that is also interesting about PinkPantheress. I think that this year has been the best year for her ever. She released a mixtape called Fancy That. It probably didn't come close to doing as well as what Boys a Liar did. It's not like she has a top 10 record or anything like that, but she is on the lips of every single tastemaker or pop fan worldwide, it feels like. And obviously Illegal managed to be a bit of a viral success for her, but the way that people are talking about her now and the enthusiasm that they have for her and the way that she's moving up festival lineups and is being touted as this kind of pop, goddess in some kind of way. People are really trusting her with her vision and trusting her with her taste. And I feel like that's been more important than anything for her because Boys a Liar gave her that obviously viral moment that helped propel her up the charts. But as we've seen with Ice Spice, who was also on that song, that is really fleeting, that kind of success. Whereas if you can build a fan base that really trusts your vision and really understands your vision and where you're heading with it and knows that you've got this really trademark sound, I think that is way more long lasting. And that is a major takeaway of 2025 from me. And it brings me to the final artist that I want to talk about in this section, which is JADE. JADE obviously came from Little Mix. Little Mix had huge commercial success, massive ubiquitous hits with things like Shout Out to My Ex, Black Magic. They never managed to crack the US really, but have obviously got some fans here. But they largely operated within commercial pop music. JADE's come through and not really made her sound so that it shuns that kind of world, but she's made music that's far more adventurous and also just really bold and really her. And because of that, she's really managed to get this fan base. And a lot of them who I talk about and talk to, they don't really have much of a history with Little Mix. They've really come into this for JADE because she's been able to do similar to what PinkPantheress and Zara have done and just build a really strong fan base by just sticking to her guns. And I feel like they are three of the most successful artists of 2025 for me. And yet I don't have any chart stats to back that up really. Similarly, actually, about Addison Rae, who I think has done a phenomenal job in carving her name into a wider audience this year without having any really huge hits off that album. Obviously, Diet Pepsi was a moderate hit last year, but none of the singles from Addison have been top 10 Billboard records, but she still managed to have a top 5 album. She's on an incredibly successful headline tour run. She is on the second line of the Coachella lineup. It's all about just sticking to your vision. And I don't think there's going to be any more of that chasing a sound that's on the charts, because what are you chasing exactly? There is no sound to chase. I mean, maybe if you want to make a song like Ordinary or infuse some country into your work, that's the closest that you're going to get to following some kind of mainstream pop sound, because it really does not exist right now. And that makes it frustrating and difficult for artists who don't really have a vision. And it makes it very exciting for artists who do really have a vision. And I don't think that chart success is impossible for these artists. We saw it last year with Charli XCX and Brat, but I just don't think it matters. And who cares? There's a lot of artists who played at Madison Square Gardens this year who have not really had any hits. Haim, for example, have never really had a hit in their career. But I think if you are selling out Madison Square Garden, you're doing something incredibly right. And maybe that's where we should be measuring success this year. And I think that's an exciting thing moving forward in general, because it means that we can start kind of taking our eyes off these stan chart wars and start just focusing like closer to home and looking at your favorite artists and what you want from them sonically, and knowing that they have the creative freedom to try whatever they want to try without having to be so concerned about fitting into this bubble, basically. I really like that. And I think that that's the thing moving forward at the end of the year that I have been particularly excited about and heartened by. And they're my favorite projects, really, that have come from this year, are the ones that I feel like have had some kind of movement, even if it's been a real micro movement. Seen it with Addison Rae, as I said, PinkPantheress, OK Lou, I think had the same thing happen. I even think, Audrey Hobart as well had that happen. I feel like Lola Young had an incredibly good record, but was kind of stuck in that between of like, oh, I need another Billboard hit. She didn't get that, but she had an incredible album. But I think that that kind of contributed to her, I don't really know what to call it, but I guess just burnout in general. I think it's also why we're seeing artists like Miley Cyrus maybe not do so well right now, because she is considered as this like superstar who's meant to be sort of like a 4-quadrant artist and tick all these boxes. Obviously, Flowers was a hit on so many different radio formats and did so well globally that she's meant to follow up that success. But she clearly doesn't want to. Like her artistic pulse is drawing her somewhere else. Something Beautiful to me is her best record by far, but is probably going to go down, bar Dead Pets, as her least successful, which is crazy to me. But I feel like if you want to say whether this year was a success or not for her, artistically, I think it was a great success. I think that Something Beautiful is a breakthrough for her, and something that hopefully like takes some of the artistic shackles off and allows her to experiment more, knowing that maybe that sort of success just isn't for her or isn't important anymore. It definitely isn't the biggest measure, because when you look at Abracadabra, that wasn't even a top 10 record. And I feel like that's the one song or one of a few songs that everyone can really mention from this year. Let's talk about the genres that have had really good years and a genre that hasn't had such a good year. Obviously, I've talked about alternative rock having quite a moment and many like breakthrough stars coming through from that. Just the alternative sphere in general, actually. I think it's been a really good year for like Dijon and also Geese, and these artists that you wouldn't really consider being able to get widespread attention, but them really having a stranglehold on the culture, whatever the culture is anymore. R&B is another one that I want to talk about, because if you look at the charts right now, you've got Mutt, Leon Thomas, you've got Kehlani, Folded, Ravyn Lenae with Love Me Not was one of the big breakthroughs of this year. Summer Walker just came off the back of an incredibly good first week of sales for her album. And it's been a while since we've seen R&B be able to dominate the charts like it is right now. Mariah the Scientist is another one who's done well. Carly Uchis, if you want to put her in the R&B box. But these are not R&B songs that are trying to do anything like crazy different. Folded by Kehlani has such a nostalgia attached to it, to sort of Babyface, Jermaine Dupri era R&B, but it's managing to cut through again. And I don't think we've seen this in a long while, certainly in the last decade. So that to me is very exciting to be able to watch as well. In terms of the genre that has struggled this year, it's been a weird year for rap music, which is interesting because if you look at the Grammys Album of the Year nominations, there are 3 rap albums, which is the most that have ever been in the category. There's Clips, there's Tyler, the Creator, and there's Kendrick Lamar, which signals good things for the genre, I guess. But the Grammys is typically years behind anything else that's going on. And I think that's what's happening right now, because off the back of Kendrick having this major moment at the top of the year with GNX and the Super Bowl and the tour that followed it as well, and then also Doechii having such a good year off the back of the Grammys, it all kind of faded. And we got to a point a couple weeks ago where there was not a single rap song in the top 40. This is a genre that the main story for the past couple years has been how much dominance it's been able to have on mainstream music. And I'm not exactly sure why it's faded. I feel like maybe as it begun to blow up, the labels just invested so much money in signing all of these people, and maybe the development or the, like, I don't know, harnessing their true talent wasn't really there, and they were all chasing a quick hit. And because of that, I think a lot of those stars from the like early 2020s era kind of burnt out in a way. And it's a shame to see, but I do think that there are a lot of good hip hop artists around right now. I mean, I think that Tyler is obviously one of the biggest stars in the world right now. Glorilla is one of my personal favorites. Monaleo, I think, is very exciting as well. I think that there's enough to ensure that it's going to get its shit together over the next year or so. But this year's definitely been a difficult year for hip hop in general. Let's roll through what are some of the biggest albums of the year in terms of the best selling, and just see if that tells us anything about 2025. The Life of a Showgirl is up the top, followed by Hurry Up Tomorrow, followed by Karma. What these three albums tell me is that the strongest fan base will rise to the top, because these are three albums that I don't necessarily feel like have majorly permeated their own fan bases, however large they are. I mean, maybe The Life of The Fate of Ophelia has, but in terms of Hurry Up Tomorrow, apart from Timeless, The Weeknd really struggled to get a hit as big as something, say, Blinding Lights. And then, of course, Stray Kids in the K-pop world have such a dominance as well, but they haven't really had a hit that you would say has defined the year in any way. So I feel like when you also look at the Morgan Wallen record and also Lady Gaga's as well, it's all about just harnessing your own fan base and servicing them. Like, the idea of being able to please everybody right now is gone. And so looking at the top 10 best-selling albums of 2025 so far, there's literally no trend I can see other than the biggest artists will rise to the top. There's no real breakthroughs this year in the same way that there was Chappell Roan and Sabrina Carpenter last year. I mean, Olivia Dean will probably end up in this list by the end of the year. But yeah, a pretty stagnant year on that side of things. To finish up, I asked people on Instagram whether they had any questions for me about pop music in 2025. And I'm just going to roll through and answer a few of them. So the first one they asked was, are you more hopeful of music being better in 2026? And I guess the answer is yes. I feel a lot more hopeful than I was a couple of weeks ago. Billboard has obviously revised its rules, and it is now clearing out some of the older songs on the charts earlier than they were before. And I think that that's a good thing, because I think losing a bar song Tipsy, Lose Control, Beautiful Things, Benson Boone is making more room for the Kalanis, Leon Thomases of the world, which I think is a good thing. But I'm also feeling more hopeful about us just finding a different way to measure success, and artists not feeling like they have to make music for the charts, but them feeling like they have the creative freedom to service not only their fans, but their own artistic impulses and do things that are more interesting. And I think that the records that have come through towards the tail end of the year, particularly things like Lux by Rosalia, or even the Olivia Dean record as well, show to me that we're in a good period. We're moving forward in a good way, where artists are going to be able to do exactly what they want to do and still find mainstream success, or whatever definition of mainstream success you have by doing that. So yes, I feel a lot more hopeful. about it. Who do you think is going to top pop in 2026? This is a really hard question because I think if you'd asked me at the top of the year, I probably could have predicted another Taylor Swift album. I could have predicted The Weeknd. I probably would have said that Miley Cyrus was going to do a lot better. I couldn't have predicted Olivia Dean having the breakout that she had. And I probably couldn't have predicted Lady Gaga having as good a year as she did have. I also couldn't have predicted Man's Best Friend, a second record from Sabrina Carpenter coming. So it is going to be hard, but I do just feel like in 2026, we're going to see more of these fringe artists really have headline grabbing moments. And the people that come to mind when I'm thinking of that is like, I think it's going to be a really big year for Ray. I think that she's going to have her second record and it's going to absolutely blow up. I think for these bands like Geese, I think are going to continue to do incredibly well. I feel like artists like Ethel Cain and the Marias are the type that we're going to start see infiltrating the charts, or at least infiltrating like much more mainstream pockets of music. That's been a really interesting thing to watch as well, is the success of the Marias, who are nominated for Best New Artist. Two, that they haven't really had to compromise on their sound at all to find this success, and they have just dominated streaming for the entire year. So I feel like more artists like that feel alternative at a glance, but are finding much, much, much bigger audiences. And I'm excited to watch that. In terms of major artists who are going to come back, I'm anticipating we're going to get the third part of this Beyonce trilogy that we've been watching unfold. I'm very excited about that happening. The other major pop stars, I don't know. I feel like it could be another slightly flat year, but that's fine with me. I'm excited to see these new artists come through and do their thing, and for there to be a real shake-up in terms of the artists at the top of the pack. What 2025 songs do you think are indicative of where pop is going in 2026? Look, I think the theme of this podcast has really been that there is no trend emerging, but if I had to guess, it's going to be more of this traditional sort of Motown-leaning soul sound. I'm thinking Olivia Dean and Ray as being the two examples of where we could be heading. And I think it's just because that type of music feels a little bit safer right now. And I feel like just in terms of radio is leaning much more safer, much more conservative, much more traditional. But I also do think there is a real vibe for feel-good music that is uncomplicated right now, and they really satisfy that brief. So they're the two that I would highlight for that. This question I find really interesting. Is streaming ruining music by turning us into passive listeners? I am actually reading a book on this right now, and I do think that a lot of the music that is rising to the top is the type that doesn't really prick your ears up too much. And as much as I love Olivia Dean, I think she's a good example of this, because her music is the kind of music that you can have on in the background and you're not ever going to really think about switching it off. And I think that's the nature of how this algorithm-based music and like Spotify radio kind of stuff is working right now, where it's meant to operate at a way where it almost doesn't wake you, almost doesn't disturb you. And that's a shame, because I do want to hear more pointier, more jagged pop music. And I do think that it is being made, but it's perhaps not finding the ears that it could, if that makes sense. And I also think with this AI trend emerging, where AI is able to make music that feels honestly just like redundant and kind of brain deadening, I think we're going to hear more of that. And that is a shame. So yeah, I do think it is turning us in to more passive listeners, and we're getting a lot more background music. Is 2025's music as bland as it was before the summer? I mean, obviously I went out on a big limb and said that there was no song of the summer, and I said that very early on in the summer, and I stand by that. I don't think it is as bland. I think I was probably looking at it from the wrong perspective, and I was seeking a ubiquitous hit in the same way that Espresso was last year, or any of Chapel Roan stuff, or the whole Brat Summer movement was. And that didn't come, and I really don't think it's going to come next year as well. Your song of the summer is whatever you and your friends make it, because music is now being made for certain groups and communities, and it can be a massive hit inside that community and be a hit nowhere else. And maybe we just have to be okay with that. The final question is, what genres are influencing pop music in 2025? I think that the country thing has been something that's come through quite obviously. And I also think alternative rock and singer-songwriter styles are the major influences in pop music right now. But I think we're going to see this Motown and soul influence continue to permeate well into 2026. Next time you hear from me, I'll be talking about my favorite songs and albums of the year. I was actually kind of worried about my list for this year because it didn't feel half as exciting as last year. But the good thing about there being not as many headline grabbing moments is it's giving me the opportunity to go and listen to like smaller records and newer artists and delve into some more interesting stuff. And I actually feel really excited about my list. I feel like there's some really good unexpected stuff on there. And I think that it's actually been a pretty good year for music in general. I think there are some horrible trends going on. I think there's some very scary stuff to contemplate in the future year or so in terms of the rise of AI and the rise of just these really, really, quite frankly, boring male pop stars. But largely, I think there's enough exciting stuff going on that we can feel optimistic about it. Keep an eye out on your feed for the best songs and albums of 2025. And let me know your best songs and albums in the comments, because it might be something that I haven't considered and something that I might slip into my list before I reveal it. But thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. Don't forget to like or subscribe and rate it 5 stars. I will see you next time. Thank you.